Hello friends, and welcome back to the Hall of Craft! Today, we're painting a Tarrasque, the big boy. But first, I got some housekeeping to get through. So as many of you know, I crafted and painted the sun tree from Critical Role last month or the month before. And I said that I was going to give it away to one of you in the comments. So I put it into a random number generator and I selected one comment at random, and it turns out to be this guy, Miles Donnelly, and I reached out to him for his shipping information and I sent him the damn thing. And oh boy, did I underestimate how expensive shipping a big tree to the UK was going to be. So Miles, looking at you, gonna need those thumbs up on all future videos. But all jokes aside, really excited to see what you do with it, Miles. He said he was a DM and that his players were playing in Tal'Dorei, so when they make it to Whitestone and see the tree, he's going to put it on the table. And I'm just super stoked to see that come to life, and to be able to have an impact on somebody else's campaign like that just warms my heart. So I hope you enjoy it, and thank you for your super awesome comment. Moving on, Tarrasque's epic forces of nature in the Dungeons & Dragons universe. And my co-workers know about the channel and they know that I'm into the hobby, and they pooled together and got me a 3D printed Tarrasque off of Etsy for my birthday. So this is me painting the damn thing. I assembled it already and I gave it a zenith highlight, and I'm just gonna slap some paint on it. Hopefully you find this entertaining or informative and you get something out of it. And yeah, let's just jump right into it. So here we are after the zenith highlighting. It's done a really good job to bring out all the detail on him, and I did my best to hide a lot of the mold lines with green stuff, but some of them are too big to hide, so I'm just gonna live with them. I'm keeping him separate from the base because he's giant, and if I had to paint him on his base, there'd be so many areas that are just impossible to get into. So I'm going to start by mixing some flow improver and some mahogany brown in my airbrush, and I'm just going to base coat him with that. Mahogany brown's a great base coat because it's kind of a reddish brown, so it doesn't feel so boring, but other colors go on top of it really well, so I'm really happy with this choice to base coat it in this. I'm not focusing too much on the bottom. I'll hit it with the base coat, but I kind of like the differentiation between the light on top and dark on the bottom, and realistically, once he's on the base, nobody's going to be looking at his belly anyway, so I'm going to focus most of my attention on the top of this guy. So before that's even dry, actually, I'm going to come in with some muddy brown and mix it in with the mahogany in my pot and just kind of start highlighting top areas on them. I'm going to try and build more of a gradient between the dark tones on the bottom to the light tones on top. So here I'm mixing some red and some leather brown into my already brown mix in the pot, and I'm going to try and do some center highlights on his, or center mass highlights on his legs and his back, top of his head. This helps sells the 3D look of him, makes him feel more rounded, like a real object. If you ever find your airbrush is shooting too small of a stream, try backflowing a little bit, and if that doesn't help, wash the whole thing out. Okay, so like I said before, I'm going to wait for that to dry, and then the threads that were coming off this guy were really bothering me, so I went in with a pair of tweezers and I spent a good half an hour just kind of pulling them out, taking them off. The paint really revealed them. I'm not sure if it shows on camera, but it's just these little fibers that are like connecting areas of them. So once I'm satisfied with that, I'm going to take some bone shadow, a lot of bone shadow, and mix it with water to thin it down, and I'm going to coat all of his horns. Just going to use like an MR3 brush. Not too worried about being precise here. The reason we thin it down is because we don't want to totally lose that zenith highlighting. I know I cover up a lot of it in this paint job, but on his horns at least, some of it's going to show through. I really love Bone Shadow as a great base coat for horns or teeth because it's kind of got this like greenish hue to it, and on monsters, like, it just does a fantastic job transitioning from the colors of their body and the darker tones into the nice like whitish like bone color for the horns and teeth. Really blends beautifully. So at this point I'm realizing that I should probably paint the inside of his mouth before I paint his teeth, even though I want to use that same bone shadow color on his teeth. I'm going to come in with some bloody red and just hit all of the flesh inside his mouth. And then before that's even dry, I'm going to pour some of the breast cancer pink out onto my wet palette, and I'm just going to kind of blend those two colors together to get more of like a medium pink tone for the highlights, and I'm going to wet blend that onto his tongue and like the top of his mouth a little bit. Leaving like the center fold of his tongue with more of that darker red, but just kind of pulling the pink into it. This is going to look a little bright right now, but when we come in with a wash later, it's going to darken it all up and make it feel a lot more natural. Okay, so coming back with more bone shadow, watering it down. And give the teeth or the mouth a little more time to dry before I do the teeth. And I'm gonna hit all these spines on his front legs. He has these like really nasty looking shoulders and elbow spikes only on his front legs, and I felt like I should really make those the same color as his horns. And he has some around his eyes too, and these little plate pieces on his jaw. Felt like it'd be really cool to kind of call those out in the same color, make it look really intense. Alright, so I've given the mouth enough time to dry, and now I'm going to hit all the teeth with that bone shadow as well. Not too worried about the inside of the teeth. I'll do my best to get it, but if I don't, I'm not going to cry over it. So once that's all dry, I'm going to dry brush it with some aged bone. So these two colors are like the only colors you need when you're doing bones. You hit it with the bone shadow for the base coat, and then you dry brush with aged bone, and it's just perfect as is. Just make sure to get almost all the paint off your brush when you're dry brushing. I find a mistake a lot of new people to the hobby, including myself when I was new to the hobby, make is that they wipe most of the paint off, but not enough, and they get this like streaky dry brush. I did that for a long time before I realized what I was doing wrong. It feels bad because it feels like you're wasting a lot of paint, but it's worth it to get the effect. One of the interesting challenges about painting this model is just finding where to grab him and hold him. Really recommend painting large models like this with gloves, just so you don't wipe the paint off with your fingertips while you're holding on to it. So that's where we're at so far. Pretty happy. I do want to differentiate his claws from his horns. And I was looking at the photo of the Tarrasque in the monster manual, and it does kind of depict him as having these like black claws with this really dramatic highlight on them. So I'm just gonna paint this guy's nails. I'm gonna get my coal black and I'm just gonna give him a pedicure? Mani-pedi? I'm hitting the hands too, so I guess it's both. Okay, so now I'm going to take a wash. Maybe it's because I've been watching too much Attack on Titan, but I love the look of the armored Titan where he has these kind of like red muscly bits underneath all of these more flesh-toned kind of plate armor. And I felt like it'd be a great opportunity to try and do something kind of like that on the Tarrasque, because he does have these really defined muscle areas on his leg and sides, and even kind of his back too. So I'm going to come in with the red wash from Citadel, and I'm just going to intentionally only put it in the cracks on his legs and sides and back, leaving the top areas the colors that I've already painted. And I do about 2 coats with this to kind of get the darkness that I'm looking for. I was a little worried about doing this before I started. I thought it might kind of look absurd, but I'm really happy with how this step turns out, and it just goes to show, trust your gut. A little bit tedious though. I'm also going to put it on his face in those kind of folds. And then I'm going to flip him over and just do all of his back. Something kind of therapeutic about tracing out all these lines. Pro tip, take your Citadel washes and put them far away from your model on the other side of your table. That way you don't knock them over. Alright, so while that's drying, I'm going to take some leather white, and I'm going to put that dramatic highlight that I was mentioning on his claws. So I'm just going to kind of pick out where the light would be hitting this thing, and drag my brush along. I know this looks a little insane at this point in time, but the wash will bring it back down a little bit. I've also watered down my leather white quite a bit, so it'll dry a little more translucent than that. But we are putting white on black, so the contrast is pretty crazy. Alright, so I'm going to take some leather brown, and I'm going to go back to dry brushing. So I'm going to re-establish some of those center mass highlights that I put on his arms and legs. I'm going to be pretty sparing with this. I don't want to overpower anything, but I do want to amp up the contrast between those dark red areas and the raised areas. I also want to separate his like underbody from this like plate that he seems to have on his back. So one way I'm trying to do that is by giving his body more of like a tan highlight, and then giving the plate more of like a orangish red highlight. So now I have a brown wash, and we're gonna put that highlight, or that wash I was talking about, on his mouth here to kind of bring it back down. I'm also going to hit his teeth and the spines on his shoulders and arms. And on his face too. My thought process at the time was that the ones on his shoulders and arms and face should look a little more brownish and less like the big intense ones on his back. In hindsight, I'm not sure if this is necessary because I kind of made it too dark and I come back in with the dry brush again at the end, and I don't feel like it really, established anything. But one step that I did do with this wash that I'm really happy with is I just outlined the bottom of the spikes on his back to just pop them off of his back. It just establishes that shadow around the base. One mistake I used to make a lot was thinking that I needed to coat everything in a wash. And that's not true at all. You can be very intentional about where you put them. Okay, so while that's drying, we have his base. So this is the bright orange color that this model started as before I primed him. And I'm going to kind of build up the base a little bit with some Milliput. It's my first time using this product, but I'm pretty happy with it. It dries super fast. It's incredibly sticky. I'm not sure if you're required to wear gloves while using it, but I found it ridiculously difficult to work with gloves, so I dropped the gloves and just decided to mix this up with my bare hands. Let me know in the comments if I'm gonna die. So once that's achieved the right consistency, I'm just gonna start spreading it around on the base. And it takes a little bit of force to kind of get it to mash around, but I just work with it until it's something I'm happy with. Pushing it around with my thumb actually gave it this like nice natural kind of ripping texture, which I liked. I think some people don't like it, but I was pretty stoked about it, so I kept it. And I just take some sculpting tools and I add some detail to it. I tried to press him into it so I could see where his feet were going to be. It didn't really do anything in the grand scheme of things. So if you're replicating this process, don't bother. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside to dry, and I'm going to come back to the Tarrasque and dry brush some aged bone. So those areas that I hit the wash, darken them a little too much, so I'm going to come back in, dry brush the highlights back in.
Someone could save you, but they won't. Hate partying on sinking boats. You would rather keep your clothes dry. You're pretty sharp around the edge. You cut the dreams right out your head. Never good at keeping friends. You're not a nice girl. You're in your own.
Dry brushing this model has some really interesting side effects because of all the textures from 3D printing it. He has these kind of like spiral forms on all of his horns, which I thought was going to be a big problem before I started painting him, but kind of adds to the effect of this giant, massive creature. As you can see, I've been not focusing on the underbelly at all because I want to focus my efforts on the parts people are actually going to see. So after consulting the resident art director, it was determined that the top of his back needs a more dramatic highlight, but his legs are looking great. So I've got some Phoenix Red and Leather Brown, and I'm going to mix them pretty much 50-50 just to get this bright orange. And I'm going to go back and center highlight the middle of his back. Okay, so here we go. Make sure you get almost all the paint off your brush, and then just go at the middle of his back. I was a little hesitant of this step. I thought that I might be overdoing it, as I have a tendency to do when I'm painting, but really happy I did.
Sometimes I like LA rooftop sunrise. Most nights I try to be all by myself.
That just really makes him pop.
But I still need you.
Okay, so time to do his eyes. So I just have some leaf green and some moth green, and I'm going to wet blend them on his eyes, doing my best to not get it on his eyelids. And I'm putting them on straight without watering them down at all, because I don't want this to run. I have a tendency to overwater my paints when I water them down, and then the paint just kind of runs in places I don't want it to, so I'm just putting them on full force. And this will take a couple coats to get it 100% coverage. I'm just going to use the moth green and hit like the top of his eye, and because it's all still wet, it's going to kind of blend together in a more natural way. Alright, so while that's drying, I'm just going to fix a couple of the mistakes on his mouth here. So when I was dry brushing his teeth, I kind of caught the edge of his tongue, so I'm coming back in with the pink that I had used before. Still have it on my wet palette, so I'm just going to reuse that color. One of the main benefits of having a wet palette is that even a couple days later you can reuse colors that you mixed up. Alright, so we're back to the base now. The Milliput's all dry, and I'm just going to use a Sharpie and kind of trace out where he's going to land, because I don't want to put too much extra stuff on this base and then not be able to stick him to it. So I'm just going to roughly trace out where his feet land, and then I'm just going to cover this thing in super glue. I'm just going to pick out areas where I want to add rocks and just kind of move the super glue around. Kind of going randomly wherever I feel like, and then once I'm satisfied, I'm just going to start dropping rocks on it. So I picked up some super glue accelerant. My first time using this product, but I'm super impressed. Works instantly. Just spray this thing a bunch with that and then flip it over and get rid of all the excess rocks, and that super glue is dry. It took seconds. Almost dries too fast. So just make sure all the extras are off, and then I'm gonna wait for that accelerant to kind of dry a little bit, because it really made the whole thing super wet. I'm just gonna clean up all that extra rocks and put them back in my container. So now the base is ready to be primed. So I just got my Vallejo surface primer, and I'm going to brush it on. I think this product is supposed to be used in the airbrush, but I always find it clogs up my airbrush, and I much prefer to brush it on. So I'm going to set the base back aside to dry, and I'm just going to come in and do that second coat that I was talking about on his eyes. I'm actually going to add some golden glow, just like a drop to the top of his eyes. I find that highlighting green, or at least yellowish greens with yellow, always looks really good. Okay, so once the primer's dry on the base, I'm going to mix up some cinnamon brown and some burnt umber. I'm going to water them down quite a bit so that the paint kind of gets into all the cracks and crevices. And I'm just going to wet blend this base. Just going crazy with the paint. It's like you're mixing a brown soup on top of this thing. It's so watery, but it gets everywhere, and it looks like you're using way too much paint. It looks like I'm using way too much paint, but it dries pretty good. Okay, so that dried pretty nicely, and I'm gonna paint the rocks. So I have a taupe, And I'm not dry brushing, I'm just stippling with my brush on top of the rocks. I don't mind if I miss the rocks a little bit, but I'm trying to just hit the rocks. Okay, so now I got some golden brown and I'm gonna dry brush some highlights onto the browns of this base. I don't have a particular direction in mind with this dry brush, I'm kind of just going against the grain in multiple areas. I'm gonna mix up some greens here, just wet blend on some grass shapes. So I have forest green and leaf green, I believe. I like to just do a big area of forest green and then hit the leaf green in the middle of it. Now I'm just washing the whole thing after that's dry. So I have my homemade dark brown wash. It's flow improver and brown and black inks and matte medium. I'm just going to be pretty liberal with that and put it everywhere. Just kind of dropping it right on top of the rocks to make sure that the wash gets in there, because those are the areas that need to be broken up a little bit more. I generally try to do that step at the end of the night when I know I'm going to be done, because it takes a long time to dry. So I'll come back the next day once it is dry with a suede, and I'm just going to dry brush some highlights onto the rocks. I'm going to come back with the golden brown and add some more highlights back onto the browns and the grass. Actually, I find that the golden brown dry brush on top of the grass helps it feel a little more natural. So now I have some E6000 and it's time to attach the Tarrasque to his base. I don't want to move forward on the base with any more additions until I kind of know exactly where he's going to be, so I'm just going to take a ton of E6000 and spread it over the bottom of his feet and then just press him down onto this. Now, I like to leave E6000 for quite a while to dry because I don't want him moving around, so I left him overnight and I come back the next day and he's fully secure to that base. But there is a couple shiny areas where the E6000 kind of squished out, so I'm going to be covering those with flock. I got this flock package that had this kind of log in it, and I thought it'd be really great, and it would be a good way to give him scale, because right now he could just be a giant lizard or a regular sized lizard in a game where your miniatures are giant. So putting like a tree or a log on the base, I thought would be a good way to make him look like, you know, he's rampaging. This Godzilla-sized monster. It's a little too long as is though, so I'm gonna break it. I'm just gonna play around with it a bit to see how I kind of want it to fall on the base. And that'll determine kind of where I put my flock. When doing stuff like this, I find it's better to pick your biggest element first and then put all your other small elements kind of around it. They fall naturally after that. So once I'm kind of happy with a direction, I'm going to take some super glue and just cover the bottom of this thing in it. I'm not sure if this works super well because the bark looked like it was soaking it up right away, and I was a little worried that it wasn't going to hold well. I know that super glue takes a minute, but it just didn't feel like it was sticking, so I take it back off and I just give it another dab of white glue. It holds in the end, so one of those two is holding it there. I'm not quite sure which one though. Okay, so I'm just gonna add all the other pieces around this this Tarrasque base. So I want to cover that area in some moss beside his foot. Looks like he just stamped on a giant brush or something. And then just gonna add some white glue dabs around there and then put my flock on top of it. I'm just gonna build up areas around this log, add little extra pieces of the log, just whatever I kind of feel like. I don't want to make it too busy, but I do want to look like he just knocked over a tree. Okay, so once I have everything in a place I'm satisfied with, I have a bottle that is half water, half white glue, and I'm just going to douse everything on here to make sure that it doesn't go anywhere. This is going to look crazy, but it worked pretty well, so can't argue with the results. And once it's all on there, I'm going to take the brush and just kind of move it around, make sure everything kind of gets soaked by it. This also helps kind of blend it together a little bit. Some of the dyes from the flocks kind of blend into the white glue and then seep into the ground. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to take a paper towel and kind of wipe it up so I don't have a mess all over my workplace. And once that's dry, the last step of painting is just to reestablish that black rim on the base and kind of cover up the bottom of it too, because I don't want any neon orange on this guy. And then I'll set that aside to dry. So as always, the final step is coating in some varnish. I'm using gloss varnish here because I just love how much it makes the colors pop on any piece. And given how brown he is, having the colors pop is kind of important. And his base already kind of looks a little bit wet, so the gloss varnish kind of helps that look. And there's how he is. Hope you had fun, guys.
And that's it, my friends. That's all there is to this video. I hope you had a good time. I know I did. I was a little worried at the beginning about how it was going to turn out, given how many mold lines it had and how grainy he was. But you know what? He turned out pretty good, so maybe I know a thing or two. Anyway, like and comment and subscribe, because I got another video coming out pretty soon, and I think it's going to be good. It's going to be desert terrain, because my parties go into the Desert of Tears, and I need it anyway. So stay tuned if that sounds fun. I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.